Pues es un gusto ver a todos aquí. I'm going to switch to English because our guest today is all in English. I'll give my welcome to Morten, Axel, Pedersen, to August, Lohse, and to Emilie. Oh, I'm sorry, Emilie. Munch, Gregersen. They come from the Center of Social Data Science in Copenhagen, the University of Copenhagen, which is an interdisciplinary center where they try to combine social science and data science. Actually, I think we can see that in the groups here today, because Morten and Emilie has some kind of background in anthropology. Well, Morten a lot. Emilie, I could see she also has a little. While August, who's joining us here today, he has a background in political science, but more than anything in data science. They are going to speak today about EthNote, which is a digital tool for field notes collecting, sharing, and processing, which is a project that they have at the Copenhagen University with funding from EU funding and also from other places. I think they will probably explain it better than me. Well, I don't really want to go into all that these people have done, but I'll just mention that Morten Pedersen, that's the director of the center, he has also a long history in anthropology and has several books out, most of them as a co-author, but also his own, with a long work in Mongolia. And basically being part of this, you can call the ontological turn, but I think 10 years back he took kind of a jump over into data science, and now he tries to combine those two things, which this center that has actually a very a good story. I don't know if you're coming into that more, but he just told me that this center was actually founded somehow randomly because they suddenly were together, different faculties, and they found out they had a shared ground and there was some funding available. And that's the way it kind of developed and turned into what today is a fairly big center. They have like 20 PhDs just at the center. So it's maybe a center of name, but it can be considered a department of action, if you can say it that way. Anyhow, I will leave the floor to you, Axel.
Thank you, and thank you. And should I turn this on, or is it? Oh, good. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to Louise and the rest of you. Really nice to be here. I'm also happy to be here together with August and Emilie, who's on with us online. I'm running up from elsewhere in Spain. I could not give this presentation, and it would not be proper for me to give this presentation alone, because it really is the result of a collaborative effort, and the title reflects probably the last half or 1/3 of the paper. The EthNote part is the one that Emilie is going to give us the full sort of flavor of. August and I are in different ways going to give the sort of like context that has led us to develop this platform for ethnographic data collection and sharing that we call EthNote. But so I'm going to be starting out talking for some 10-12 minutes, and then I'll pass the word to August and to Emilie. So I don't know what the seminar culture is like here, but if you are welcome to ask questions along the way. Where I come from with these data scientists, we're just used to that. They will just like interrupt along the way and say, "Can you just explain this figure over there?" Yeah. So whatever the form is here, we can accommodate. Yeah. So I think without any further ado, maybe we should just start and thank you for helping me starting the slideshow and getting up on Teams. Yep, cool. Let me just jump right into the sort of backstory that I will be telling here. Overall, I'm interested in the relationship between anthropology and data science. And I've been writing about one way of putting this relationship is that there are three kinds of relationships one can imagine and also exist to some extent. The first one is by far the most common, anthropology of data science. You can also talk about something that is anthropology with data science, and maybe you can also, to some extent, talk about anthropology as a form of data science. So I'll just go super briefly over these. So the anthropology of data science, I think, should be familiar with many anthropologists. So just like anthropologists have studied people doing, agriculture or hunting or shamanism or anything really, death cults in Mexico City, anthropologists have also studied ethnographically data science. And there is a sort of a proud tradition of that, and important studies by Nick Siever, various people working in the sort of relationship between anthropology and science and technology studies. I'm not going to go into that tradition, although I think it's very important, and it's good that we have anthropology to ethnographically explain what data science are like as a tribe. But that is not, to some extent, what we have been interested in. I have been interested in SODAS. I've been interested in, over the last first 5 years of my time at SODAS, what we would call back then complementary social science. The idea was that could you somehow mix anthropology in with various forms of sensor data? We didn't try to combine the data. We rather tried to do something more like of a montage or even a sort of like art project. So in this case, we went to a group of students that we studied already, a cohort of students, and then we said, could we combine ethnographic field notes from a PhD student who had participated in a lot of student parties with essentially Bluetooth signals on the same students, from the same students' phones, so that we could sort of mesh together these various data forms and say something experimentally about the nature of what in this case, a party was for engineer students in Denmark. I've done a lot of that and published on it, and but what I'm particularly interested more still maybe as a prospect rather than something that is a reality is what I call the anthropology as data science. That's why I some extent call it a terra incognita here. That there are some examples of it, and indeed I think we've come to a place here where there are people who, in this very place, this department, who are doing this, and that's also why it's a pleasure to be here. But there really is not a lot of anthropology to, you might say, can I do anthropology with the kinds of techniques and the kinds of big data, so-called, that come from digital devices broadly consumed? Can I actually answer anthropological questions computationally? So let me just reflect a little bit on what that sort of like, what kind of project is that? Yeah. So people have noticed precisely for this is a computer scientist this citation is from, but I think sort of anecdotally we all know this, that anthropology among the social sciences is the least mathematized and computerized, as he puts it. But as he also puts it, Cunningham, is that that's actually quite surprising given the vast amount of quantitative data that field anthropologists record, classify, and sift. We talked about the human area relations bias here at Yale and others, but when we think about it, anthropological data are actually to some extent quite big, or at least they're quite, it's not small data. There are many data points in it, but they're generated in a qualitative manner, but that doesn't mean that they're not big, they're just big in a particular kind of like unstructured way that is very hard to get hold of. And to some extent what we've been trying to develop today is like ways in which we can sort of like turn the bigness of anthropological data into a form of data that can actually be processed by computers. But in more sort of theoretical sense, I think you can go through this kind of like almost like a logical sort of like trajectory that's put here, that as Tim Ingold and others have argued, I think really sort of like convincingly, anthropology is not the same thing as ethnography. Anthropology is more than ethnography. Of course, ethnography is to some extent also something that is more than anthropology, because sociologists can do ethnography without being anthropologists, but there's also something that is anthropology that is not ethnography. When you think about it, why shouldn't anthropological questions, such as like the nature of, let's say, shamanism or the relationship between the death cult in Mexico City and global capitalism or global crime networks, why couldn't such questions be answered quantitatively? There's no inherent deep reason why anthropological questions should not be answered quantitatively. There are only what you might call historical or indeed cultural reasons that anthropology have boxed itself into as an identity where it considers us to be the discipline that is never quantitative. But my claim would be that that is a disadvantage to us, and also again, anthropology can and should be conducted quantitatively too. Of course, also qualitatively, also with ethnography. But I'm interested here in pursuing the relationship between quantitative data and quantitative methods and anthropology. And I think one way of looking for that, I'm a great fan of Claude Lévi-Strauss. I was also before I got into the quantitative sort of thinking, but of course, one of the things we all associate Lévi-Strauss with, often in a sort of negative way, is precisely the so-called formalism. Often people ridicule even Lévi-Strauss for his kind of mathematical attempt to be sort of mathematical. But I actually think that that is exactly one more reason to love Lévi-Strauss among many good reasons to love Lévi-Strauss. And of course, what was it that Lévi-Strauss tried to do? Well, in these kind of like famous, in this case, depiction of a so-called totemic operator, he tried to essentially make abstract formalized systems for cultural forms. He also had various sort of like ideas about how one might turn these kind of formalist ideas into actually mathematical sort of investigations. He never did it. And some historians about this have debated whether it's because he didn't have people around him who could help him doing it, or the time was just not ripe for it at Collège de France in the 60s. The fact of the matter is, as Nick Siever has put it here, the mapping computer allowed Lévi-Strauss' ideal method to exist in theory. He did any kind of mathematical anthropology, but he sort of laid a theoretical groundwork and his vision for it, or as he puts in this quite nice quote, I think, the fundamental requirement of anthropology is that it begins with a personal relation and ends with a personal experience. But in between, there's room for plenty of computers. So, in other words, I think what anthropology could and maybe also will one day accomplish is what I would call like a reinvention. That is to say, it's not just that anthropology should become using data science methods and leave data science unscathed. In an ideal world, of course, while data science is already a really fragmented and quite new field, it would also be nice if anthropology had some sort of impact on data science. So like that there was some forms of data science that would start being conducted that were not done before the anthropology started meddling with the data science. Just like certain new forms of anthropology will also appear when they started to meddle with the data science. So some sort of like a creative fusion, or at least dialectics, you might say, between the two. And I've tried to do a little bit of that. I devised the concept of machine anthropology. It really is the same as computational anthropology. I saw that it sounded really cool when machine anthropology, and of course, because it sort of like relates to the idea that you can use machine learning to do anthropology, and I edited a special issue about that. But what I want to just add a few words on now, before really sort of very soon giving the word to August, is that, and we spoke a little bit about this earlier today, that I actually think that, and people have written about that, that in the interestingly, many of the founding figures of anthropology came from physics and engineering. Maybe it was a purely sort of arbitrary relationship, but my experience from admittedly working with a very kind of particular subset of physicists is that there are actually certain interesting kind of homologies, you might say, certain family resemblances between anthropology and data science, in particular kind of physics, that allow us to engage with physicists and other data scientists, applied mathematicians, but maybe in particular physicists. And I think here are 4 reasons for that. I think that physicists and anthropologists, certain kinds of physicists at least, are at least open towards working with unstructured data. That is to say, getting some large data set from somewhere, trying to find some sort of needle in that haystack, identifying a pattern, ideally maybe from those patterns, discovering some fundamental law of the universe, but less than also do like finding essentially a needle in the haystack, and to some extent, there is a very kind of material engagement with the data reality. Some people will call it inductive, probably more precisely we would call it abductive. It's a particular kind of way in which theory and data informs each other in an iterative kind of fashion. I think by all means, not all physicists do this, by all means, not anthropologists do this, but I think there are aspirations in both sort of fields for creating essentially grand discoveries from particular kind of investigations and dialogues with data, often unstructured data that in which people have not found relations before. So hence you are actually discovering something in the data rather than testing something that people already did in a new data, that you discover something in the data themselves. And I think this kind of aspiration for a sort of interdisciplinary kind of science that solves the questions of our time, where anthropology and physics are two of the players, maybe even two key players, I think is a nice vision. And just before I give the word to August, just two things. I just want to mention that, without getting into the details of it, that the people from the other social sciences, of course, are way ahead of the anthropologists, not just in terms of using quantitative data and methods, but also in terms of using machine learning to essentially solve and pose social science questions. And the political scientists have written, for example, this paper, which I think is a brilliant paper that sort of outlines all the different ways in which machine learning can be used agnostically, that is to say pragmatically, depending on the purpose. You can use it both if you do a traditional hypothesis testing experiment, maybe an online experiment or survey based on survey data, but you can also use it precisely to look into a data set for something that people haven't looked for before because they didn't have the technique to look. And that is what I think machine learning is so useful for. And here's just like a screenshot from a paper that is in review that I have written with August and a senior data scientist and another former PhD student of mine, where we try to use so-called word embedding method, and August will return to this later, to do what I would actually consider to be a distinctly computational structuralist project. Because what we tried to do was to sort of like, use word embedding to find out how different groups of people have put different meanings into the same thing. So here is basically a mapping of the way in which Democrats and Republicans, corpora, straight from Reddit, talk about particular kind of concepts pertaining to modern or contemporary US society. And I'm not going to at all try to explain how this particular kind of modeling works, certainly not mathematically, but not even like how the algorithm actually works, because it takes a little bit of time. So if you have any questions for it, together with I'll be happy to respond during question time. But meanwhile, and this is my last slide. Now, the context for what we're going to hear about now, the experiments and the pilot studies we have done to try to actually find a way of doing computational anthropology is the ERC project, of which I'm the principal investigator. It's quite a big project. It brings together different social scientists and data scientists to look at political, or actually attention economies in Denmark. One sub-project looks at political attention, and our main study in that sub-project that August and Emilie have been part of is to go to a large political festival on an island in Denmark. It takes place every year. Up to 100,000 people, including politicians, lobbyists, members of the public, youth politicians go there. And we thought, why don't we try to combine some of all the methods we have from our social science disciplines with data science to try to find out, if you like, from this radically unstructured, experimental, fieldwork-like setting, what the nature of political attention is. How does political attention actually work in the wild, you might say? And that is, I think, all I have to say as a sort of background. I suggest we swap places, because then you can change the slide.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm August. I'm Morten's PhD student here. Just a couple of slides we just go through. All right. So this will be my first slide. So I'll tell a little bit about the things that we have done in our efforts to pursue this sort of mix of data science and anthropology, sort of interpretive sciences. And I'll focus on some results that we published in this paper called, a little bit provocatively, Fixing Field Notes, because the first thing we encountered when we figured out that we wanted to work together was that the data structure, basically, that anthropologists, or at least ethnographers, tend to prefer the field note is what a computer scientist would probably call radically unstructured. It is very difficult to work with for a computer, so we had to do something about that before we could work together. So the paper poses that structuring field notes in a different way, specifically in this case a tabular way, so like a table, it makes it easier to organize them, makes it easier to integrate field note data with other types of data that you might collect. And finally, it also makes it available to people like me who want to use computational analysis on the field note data. So pictures from Google of field note examples of field notes. I don't know if these looks like what you draw. There are probably some networks in your notebooks as well. But things like this, you have drawings, you have text. You also have a little note on the drawing, a little bit of, you have a date on top of this one. You have some text that's underlined, so sort of maybe something special is going on there. And all of this is, when you read it as a human, and especially as a trained ethnographer, it's easy to see that sort of the text that's underlined, that I need to pay extra attention to this. And there's a date at the top, okay, it makes sense, that's probably the date this was written. But all of this is sort of you have to tell the computer it somehow if you want to work with it, right? It's not, this comes from our experience of reading these sorts of things, and it doesn't just come naturally. And it can also be pretty extreme, right? If you look at something like this, where you have drawing of a zebra, you have some notes on how gazelles run. You even have some questions, I think this ethnographer posed 3 or 4 questions to themselves. You have a list of things. You have some weather data, some where they are. It's just, and the next page could be something completely different, right? So this is what we call radically unstructured. How would I ever deal with this if I got this? If I got this in a physical, and then it's a physical notebook. So there's also that. It has to come into a computer somehow. So what we did to sort of solve this was that we created a phone app. So this is from a beta version that we made in 2022, which is basically just, it was basically just like a template, like a survey you opened with some fields that you have to type the things that you want to type in, and then you could write a note afterwards. And this obviously only works when you know what sort of fields or information you want to collect beforehand. But Emilie will talk later about how we sort of solve this problem in the app that we have now released. But for our project, we sort of just got together and figured out what is the type of information that we want to collect whenever we take a note. So the beautiful thing is that every time you take a note, this app will tell you have to input all of these, like the name of who's taking the note, the project name, where are you in the world, like a location, and sort of what situation are you taking the note in, some timing data, and so forth. And these were the important things for us, but you could imagine that you could customize this to whatever is important for you. I think an obvious one for many people would be like, who's the interlocutor I'm taking a note on, for example, things like this. And this becomes super useful when you want to work with it later, as I'll show. So the first obvious advantage of doing this is what we call organizability, which just means that once you have a table of your data, like this on the left here, like once you sort of put it into some nice tabular data format, you can just do overviews, like just count the number of notes you have, the number of notes you have concerning whatever, the number of notes for each ethnographer. We were a big team, so we were 16 ethnographers. So you can like count the number of notes each ethnographer has made, so forth. We also did some simple, like, counting the number of words in each note, counting the most frequent words, and then because we were interested in attention and attention dynamics, we counted like what do you call it, co-occurrences, but like what is the most common word used in sentences with attention and so forth. So you can do sort of very simple start of analysis things. You can also like slice your data, so like look at 2021, look at 2022, look at everything this group of ethnographers has written and so forth. So that's like the most obvious sort of advantage. So the next one is what we call integratability, which just means that you can combine it with other types of data. And in this case, it's simply combining it with time and date. And this, we just use this to sort of map out all of our notes in chronological order and make a timeline, which was pretty nice for analysis because we could see like, okay, all notes about attention in like the early hours of the day. Well, they said that attention was high, and all notes late in the evening, they said that no one cared about the talks at this political festival. I mean, of course, we would probably have found this anyway, but looking at it chronologically, we just made the analysis quick and easy. And I mean, this is an easy one. You can also do a little bit more like sophisticated things. So one of the things we did was like take all of our field notes and combine it with geospatial data. So where people took their notes, and then we made an interactive map such that the people analyzing the data could just like hover each of these notes and see what is this note, what does it contain, who made it, when was it, what is sort of the topic of it, and then you could click it and you could go and read it, so you could see like what was happening here. And for our project, this didn't yield like a big sort of insight, but you could imagine like if you're doing fieldwork in an area where the geology is very important, I mean, this could be super useful, right? And you can also see like, is there some area of this field site that I have sort of neglected where I haven't taken any notes? And it could also, like, it doesn't even have to be where you took the note, it could also be a note concerning this area, basically. You could combine it any way you want. And then the final thing, which I'm most excited about, is that having data in this more structured way makes it way easier to work with computationally. So we can use all of these, like, very modern computational tools from especially what we call NLP, so natural language processing, to sort of analyze the data and have, like, get a guided analysis of text in our field notes. And what we did was we used some topic models and some network analysis notes, but I mean, you could imagine anything, right? So we ran what's called a hierarchical stochastic block model and just figured out like what are the main topics in our field notes and sort of assigned each field note with a proportion of topics. But you could imagine anything. Maybe you could do semantic networks where you sort of map out how words or sentences or concepts relate to one another. You can do sentiment analysis and I mean, many more sort of more complex computational social science methods. And I know that a lot of you are already using this, and so I mean, structuring your data in this format just makes it way easier and opens up possibilities. And so there's kind of two more things you can do. For example, I know a lot of you do network analysis. I think you typically do it with people. I mean, but it's obviously a very like flexible concept, these like nodes and edges. So one of the things we did was we created this network of topics and field notes. And so we could see how does each field note relate to each topic. Like based on the contents of the field note, we sort of link them to different topics. So you can see, okay, for example, the topic of methodological considerations, quite often like there's an overlap between the notes concerning the planning of the festival. Makes sense? And then also like these notes concerning the atmosphere of the events and the crowd reactions. Well, there's also a big overlap and debate on stage. But there's basically no overlap between sort of the planning of the festival and these crowd reactions, etc. So these nice sort of structural analysis. And then finally, as Morten alluded to earlier, like we can do these things with word embeddings, which are basically techniques from machine learning to take text and place it into some like a space, basically like you call it a latent space, but this means giving each piece of text or a field note or a person, based on what they said, a position in some space. And once you do that, you can make you can sort of interpret things like a map. So you can see like these, if things are close to one another, they relate to one another. It's kind of like interpreting networks, but you don't have edges, you just have distances in spaces that, and it's very nice because you can use all sort of linear algebra tools on it. But this is just something I did with the Danish Parliament, where I took all of their text and I embedded it into some space and was like, what is the biggest difference between these things? And what we quite nicely see is there are, and I know you're not political scientists, but typically we say there are two axes of ideology, the cultural and the sort of distributional, and this quite nicely maps that, so I'm quite proud of this plot. But what we can see is that you can sort of find these sort of meaningful latent spaces and put people, parties, interlocutors, field notes, whatever you sort of have, where you have text on it, you can map it into these latent spaces and do analysis of that, which is pretty cool. And I mean, this is not like a number, right? I'm not getting out like, well, this is 40 and I got 50 here, so this is bigger. Like, this is super interpretive, right? You have to use your anthropological analysis skills to interpret these maps. So I think these are methods that are very suitable for more interpretive sciences. Yeah, so that is, in my final slides, is just this. I think I had 3 key takeaways from actually doing this sort of interdisciplinary work in the field. And I mean, the first thing is that when we talked to all of these ethnographers, they were quite clear that like using this was a smartphone app for writing, was super unintrusive or uninvasive. Like, they were already taking notes on their phone. I know not everyone does that, but those who were, they were already doing that. So this was just like, okay, I'm just going to write in this different note-taking app. So it was like basically like writing a field note for them. And then, then like working like this made it easier to work as a team, because every field note had the same structure. Like, there was not like my field note has one structure, yours has a separate one, and we both have to go home and transcribe it, and it's all jumbled up. Like, we all had the same structure. And then finally, it made it super easy to work, like, coming from different disciplines, because we agreed on the data structure and what could be done with it. And I think that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Emilie, who is on Teams.
We are, sorry. Yeah, okay, here is a picture of EthNote from the, what's it called, like the home, yeah. Can you change the slide, August?
Yeah.
As August talked about, we found some challenges with working or producing field notes in a team, and especially in an interdisciplinary team at a festival, which is a short-term and quite chaotic setting. And we found these 3 challenges. The first, that they are handwritten field notes in notebooks, which would require hours of retyping and organizations at a later point, which we did not have the time for. They often contain idiosyncratic writing, like August also talked about, like drawings, etc. And these factors make them really difficult to compile and compare across a team of ethnographers. And then finally, we had an ambition to also try and analyze the field notes computationally, for instance, to combine them also with social media data pertaining to the panel debates that we observed. Change slides. So our solution was to write field notes from a digital device, which would instantly digitize and store our field notes. We would create a field note template prior to entering the field that each ethnographer would follow when writing field notes. And then we would develop a digital infrastructure that would allow for GDPR compliant data sharing and export of data for computational analysis. Change slide. And here you see the different versions that we experimented with. There was the first in 2021, which was just a survey software. Then the second one in 2022, where we tried to make our own app. And then now EthNote, that we have been developing over the last year. It is a progressive web app, which means that it can be accessed from any device, computer, tablet, smartphone, and it transcends systems as well. So it doesn't matter if you're from a Mac or Windows, iPhone, etc., which makes it really flexible. If you change slides. Okay, so this is the interface of EthNote. It's organized in projects, which serve as the central repositories for all field notes and associated attachments you have. So your photos and videos, audio files, PDFs are all stored within the structure of a project. And then you can access your field notes in each project. You can be a team. The different projects can be of different people, and you can have different roles. So you can be a team leader or a team member, and the team leaders manage the access level and can invite new members or remove others. Change slide. And then I hope this works. Can you play the video?
Yes.
Okay, so here is a video of how you create a field note template, which is where you impose or you make the structure for your data collection. It's divided into two halves, context and text boxes. The contextual information is where you capture contextual information such as location, number of people, or a brief description of the situation that is about to take place. And then the other half is the text boxes where you write your field notes. You can also divide them into different text boxes if you, for instance, wish to separate your field observations from your own reflections, such as analytical or ethical reflections, and then it's easier for your team to read and understand your field notes. And change slide. And yes, perfect. And then once you want to create a field note, it opens up in the template that you have created as a team, and you fill in the contextual information that was defined before. Here it is me filling out the contextual information for the political festival we were at. And then we have incorporated some functions in the text boxes that provide the user with some options. For instance, we used automatic timestamps because we wanted to make a temporal comparison across our field note corpora. So here it automatically creates a timestamp when you press the enter button twice. Then we've developed a tag function using hashtag symbols. So when a team member creates a hashtag, it will become part of a shared list that updates in real time. So whenever a team member creates a tag, then I would also be able to see it. And then you can coordinate if there's some specific things you're looking for. And then it's also possible to upload photos, videos, audio files, PDFs to your field notes so that you have them for organized in one place. And you can also comment on each field note so you can communicate with your team members. Change slide. So just to talk a little bit more about some of the features. There is this hashtag system that we really like. It keeps track of each tag that is created. There are two systems. There is hashtags and which is what we call mention, inspired by social media. And then the app keeps track or keeps a quantitative overview, counting all tags that are used across the entire team. And you can also see within each field note or which tag has been used in each field note. And then in the bottom half, the hashtag context is where you can retrieve the contextual information for each tag. So you can decide how many sentences before and after. For instance, well, this is in Danish, I apologize, but begejstring, which is like enthusiasm, like before and after, how many sentences you want, and then you can download them to make a qualitative analysis, for instance. Change slide. And then we have made sure it has a very flexible export. You can export into different kinds, so Word and Excel, CSV and JSON, and it has it's optimized so that in Word it's very readable for a human, and in Excel it's very readable for a machine. For instance, like having the hashtags in a separate column, whereas in Word it will be embedded in the text. So in this way we try to allow for both more traditional qualitative analysis if you wish to create or make a qualitative analysis, or you can export it into Python, for instance, to make quantitative analysis. And change slide. And finally, I just wanted to mention briefly the future of EthNote, and we're currently applying for additional funding in the hope of expanding EthNote's features to also include more analytical tools, so you can have a GDPR-compliant way of making quantitative and qualitative analysis across a team. Yeah, but well, we'll see. And also, I also just wanted to correct that it's not released yet, but we are looking for testers if anyone would like to try it out. And that's it for me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.